All right, let's get the party started in the Panther-Lair Show on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com on a Tuesday night, July 6th, 2021 is when we are live. Make sure we've got audio. I think we have audio. Get some chatters, some people rolling in for the live stream of the podcast. I'm Chris Peak, of course, from Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. I'd like to think that if you're watching this live stream or you're listening to this podcast, you know about the website, Panther-Lair.com. If you don't, it's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Period, point blank. I think it's the best source of Pitt sports news you're going to find. Whether it's football, basketball, recruiting, we cover it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, we have message boards. And the message boards are near and dear to my heart. Yeah, I don't always agree with everybody. We don't always agree with each other, but we have good conversations and enjoy those conversations, day in, day out. All right there on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. And I mean, if you're a Pitt fan, you like to talk about Pitt sports with other Pitt fans, right? This is my new thing. This is my new mantra that I go through. I've been going on probably since the spring and working on different variations of it, but now I've sort of settled into saying this every time, that I think if you're a sports fan, and no one's really kind of argued with me about this assertion, but if you're a sports fan, you're a Pitt sports fan or any sports fan, I think there's two things that you like to do more than any other thing in terms of your sports fandom. I'm sure there are other things in your life you like to do. But there are two things you like to do more than anything else in your sports fandom. And one is to watch your favorite team, your favorite athlete, whoever it is. You like to watch the sports. But two, you like to talk about the sports. I mean, this is the reality. I mean, this is why sports talk radio is as popular as it is, because we like talking about sports. We like having these conversations. We like talking to other people about sports. I mean, I go to 4th of July picnics over the weekend. Went to two. Look at Mr. Popularity over here. Went to one on Saturday, one on Sunday. They were both with family. And actually, they were both with my wife's family in different sections. So it wasn't even like I was invited. She was invited, and me and the kids got to come along. But I mean, while we're there and we talk about sports, I mean, sports conversations are everywhere. We love to talk about sports, even the Pirates. We talk about the Pirates and entertain ourselves with those conversations. But I mean, this is what you like to do if you're a sports fan. You like to talk about sports, and that's what we give you the opportunity to do. Panther-Lair.com and the message boards there. I think it's the best online community of Pitt sports fans. So you're going to find the best Pitt conversation, best Pitt discussion right there at Panther-Lair.com. And of course, every Tuesday night, we get together here for a live Panther-Lair show. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com is the website. Is where you can go to watch it live, and you can get into the chat screen. And I think we've already got people jumping in on the chat. Let me open it up here. There it is. People are already jumping in. Glad to have this conversation started already. We love it. And, it's fun. And I know people listen to the podcast through the week. I appreciate that as well. Anybody who checks us out, I appreciate it. But, it's a lot of fun to get together here on a Tuesday night, grab a beer. I didn't get a beer. It was really hot today. And, hydration is very important. And I don't know that I hydrated enough today. And I feel like I'm going to be, I'm afraid I'm going to be feeling it tomorrow. And so I just decided against the 8:30 beer. It sounds really good. And if you're having one, kudos to you. But we got a lot to talk about. It is a beer-worthy night because there are a lot of topics to cover. And it's funny, as I talk about the message boards, a lot of the things I'm thinking about right now are conversations we've been having on the message boards all week, or at least I say all week. Today's Tuesday. Throughout the day. I mean, it was really active on the message boards the last 2 days for a few reasons that I'm sure we're going to discuss, that tied into larger conversations that we're going to discuss. And it's kind of fun when we have those discussions on the message boards. It sort of primes the pump, so to speak, for the podcast and the live stream, because been thinking about this stuff all day, been arguing with people about this stuff all day, and by 8:30 at night on Tuesday, man, I am ready to roll with these topics. So I hope you are as well. I'm going to go to the chat first off the bat. A lot of times we'll go to we'll do these things, and we'll do these live streams, and I'll sit down and I'll talk and talk for a while, monologue, whatever you want to call it, and then we'll jump into the chat section. But I want to get to a few of the chat questions because I think there's some things that we got to talk about. I think there's some topics that are certainly relevant and interesting, and I think we'll probably get to them anyway. So let's jump in on a few of the questions, and we're starting with Roman, who's a longtime fan of the podcast. I think Roman, I think you had the first chat comment on the first live stream that we ever did back in, when was that? February? 2 Februarys ago? Have we been doing this for more than a year? Dear Lord, this is how I've been spending my Tuesday nights for more than a year. That's amazing. I think. Or is it just back to, I'll have to look up the dates of when these live streams started, but I know Roman was there right from the start. He says, hey, Chris, interested to hear your take on the name, image, likeness and its immediate impact on college football. Seems like the schools with the big recruiting advantages are only going to get bigger. I fear Pitt will be left in the dust. So, I'm very much of the opinion, not even opinion, I'm very much of the mindset that I'm going to wait, I'm going to watch and see how this plays out, how this name, image, likeness stuff plays out. Because when it first cracked last week, that first day, July 1st, right? Whatever day of the week that was, last Thursday, I guess. One of the first things I think we saw was kids tweeting, go to, this company, go to this website, and you can save 25% off your order or something like that. It was click-through commissions, and I said, okay, maybe that's what it's going to be. You're going to have like sort of local ads, local endorsement deals, things like that, and then these click-through commission deals. All right, maybe that's what it's going to be. And then things started expanding a bit, expanding. And now you've got Miami and a company, run by a wealthy alum trying to raise money to guarantee that every scholarship player on the Miami football team gets $6,000 a year. And you're trying to, you've got the kid at Oregon, Kayvon Thibodeau, I think is his name, is like some kind of 6-figure deal. The details are still sort of coming out there. And there's part of me that thinks this is some extreme stuff ready to start. That it's just, we're at the very beginning of this. This is the very, very early stage. This is day 1, day 2. It's July 6th. It hasn't even been a full week of this name, image, likeness, rights for these student athletes. And we're going to see everything spanning the entire spectrum of what's possible before we settle in on what's reasonable and what's actually going to happen and sort of become the norm. And there might be a year or 2 years of real extremes of a 6-figure deal for this guy or that guy, just for the very elite, the tip of the spear type of guys. But really what it's going to settle into is something a lot more manageable and a lot more reasonable, of guys selling t-shirts and running Twitch channels and YouTube and that kind of thing, in addition to local endorsements and whatnot. But I don't know. I don't know where it's going to settle in. And I don't know what's going to become the norm. Is every school going to follow the path that this Miami alum has, where it's going to be, we just sort of sign this blanket endorsement contract? It's not a blanket endorsement contract, but every scholarship player on the football roster has the opportunity to sign an endorsement contract that's worth $6,000 every year. I mean, because I'm pretty sure there's some Alabama alums who can put together $500,000 for a year. I'm sure there are Michigan alums and Ohio State alums, probably Penn State alums, who can put that together year in, year out and pay the entire football roster $5,000, $6,000, $10,000. And I don't know where it goes. I don't know what kind of impact it's going to have. Does Pitt end up getting left in the dust? My initial thought is no, because I didn't think things would settle into something so extreme. And I still don't think things will settle into something so extreme. But I can't rule it out, because college football fans are nuts. And wealthy college football fans are extremely nuts. And wealthy college football fans who are fans or went to some of these football factory schools, this Alabama, Ohio State, Texas, they are the nuttiest of the nuts. You look at some of these schools, you look at some of the situations that have developed over years and the issues that boosters have gotten into. You can't put anything past these people. They are wackos, and they have the money to spend, And when that's the case, you put a crazy person with a lot of money and something they're passionate about, Who knows? Who knows where it ends? Now, I wonder, and I've always sort of, for a few years, I guess I would say, as there's been talk about the Power 5 conferences and autonomy and separating from the NCAA, I've often wondered if there would eventually become sort of one super conference with those schools that you really do call blue bloods, that really do sort of earn that title, and it's Alabama, and it's Ohio State, and it's Texas. It's probably USC. You can probably, it's Michigan, it's Notre Dame. It's a handful of schools, and, maybe 10, maybe 12. And they really sort of become their own entity, and everyone else plays a different game. And I wonder if that's the worst thing that could happen. There's part of me that thinks it's not. There's part of me that thinks that the facilities arms race and what could become the NIL arms race are so out of whack and are going to become so out of whack and continue to be so out of whack that at a certain point, 90% of the schools or 85 or 88% of the schools in the Power 5 or in FBS are not going to be able to keep up. It's going to become financially infeasible to keep up. And where it just doesn't make sense. Why are we spending all this money when we don't have a snowflake's chance in we don't have, we got about as good a chance as a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest of getting to the top of the heap here. If it's not a real, why are we spending this money to do all these things if we can't really compete at that highest level? Because they're always going to outspend us by twofold or fourfold or fivefold or tenfold. What if eventually at just some point, those 10 or 12 schools who are, unhealthily obsessed with this stuff, that they will spend themselves into oblivion? What if they just go off into their own group? And the other 50-some schools in the Power 5, plus the rest of FBS, continues playing college football. And the fans support it because the fans are fans. You have something real to win. You can be the FBS champion. You don't have to be the, whatever they want to call themselves, champion. You can have something to play for. And you still have huge alumni bases and big schools. Somebody like Michigan State's not going to make that cut. You know what I mean? Somebody like Wisconsin might not make that cut. And those are big fan bases. Miami might not make... No, actually, Miami's a bad example. Their fans suck. They're not good at all. Nobody goes to those games. But, there are plenty of schools that have huge fan bases that could support something like this. And maybe their schools don't have to be quite as insane in the spending to be so far out of whack as it currently is. And maybe something like this, maybe the name, image, likeness, not the name, image, likeness legislation, but the endorsement deals that come out of it, the money that comes out of it, the money that alums at Texas and Alabama and Ohio State are willing to throw at these players becomes so outrageous that they really do just go off into their own thing. We're off on a huge tangent. We're not even 15 minutes into the podcast. But I'm going off on a tangent about the separation of college football. I don't want to see that happen. I want to keep all the Power 5 conferences together. I want to keep all the FBS schools in FBS school. I want to keep all the FBS schools in the FBS and competing together and all this stuff. I just don't. I don't know. I'd be curious to see how that kind of a scenario would play out. And as for the name, image, likeness, I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know where it's settled as in at a sort of reasonable point. Not really sure. All right, let's move on. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's get on to something that we, a little bit more relevant to Pitt. Coaster King, after yesterday's tweets, is Ryan Baer suddenly on commitment watch, or at least on notice? It goes without saying how major a get he would be. Now, Coaster King, you know our rule, right? We are not responsible for the googly eyes of other people. So when Pat Narduzzi or one of his recruiting assistants decides to start tweeting googly eyes, I cannot be held responsible for that. I do not tweet googly eyes. I make fun of googly eyes, but I do not tweet them. And so I cannot be held responsible for those googly eyes. However, it is interesting to note, a few commitment announcements that are coming up. I believe Patrick Bodie, the standout from Gateway, announced that he's got a commitment coming. Bradley Mann, a defensive end / offensive tackle, who took an official visit to Pitt a couple weeks ago, announced that he's going to be announcing his commitment this coming weekend. And he made that announcement last night. It's interesting coincidence on the timing. I'd say he would be someone I would keep an eye on more than Ryan Baer, who's another premier offensive line target that Pitt is going after. They couldn't get him in town on an official visit, but they did get him for an unofficial, and he spoke very highly of it afterward. But that's going to be a real battle. All right, Kevin Plauche gets into the real question that I think is something we do need to talk about, and we're always going to talk about. It's Tyrese Fearbry. And week after week, you guys have asked during the live stream, hey, what do you think of Tyrese Fearbry? Is Pitt going to get Tyrese Fearbry? And for the better part of the last month, for the better part of June, the answer was yes. Pitt was going to get Tyrese Fearbry. He was at Pitt on June 1st, June 3rd, June 4th, June 5th, June 6th, June 13th, June 16th, and the 27th, I want to say. He was at Pitt a lot over the course of the month of June. Unfortunately for Pitt, at one point during the month, he also visited Penn State. I think that was the 18th, 19th, 20th. That weekend, he took an official visit to Penn State. Second time he's ever been to Penn State. The first time was in April. He went up for a practice. They had a practice at Beaver Stadium, and fans could watch from the stands. Now, of course, this was a recruiting dead period, right? And by rule, coaches aren't allowed to have in-person interaction with recruits. So Tyrese Fearbry and a bunch of these prospects went up to Beaver Stadium or wherever it was to watch a practice that was open to the public because anyone could go. But there could not be any recruiting contact between the coaches and the players. And I am sure, positive, that no one would have broken that rule. Nobody would break the COVID dead period rule, right? But anyway, that was the only other time he had ever been to Penn State other than this official visit the weekend of the 25th through the 27th, or 18th through the 20th. But he comes out of the official visit talking about how if he was committing to that day, he would commit to Penn State. And on July 4th, he did just that. He committed to Penn State. This is a blow to Pitt. It's a blow to Pitt on a lot of levels. Very first thing, he's a 4-star defensive end prospect in the City League, and anytime there's a 4-star defensive end prospect playing in Allegheny County, let alone the City League, in your Pitt, you should expect to land him. You should believe you are going to land him. And for a long time, it looked like they were going to land him. That's the second thing. There's very little, I think, that Pitt could have done more to recruit Tyrese Fearbry. They did everything with this guy. I mean, they recruited him to no end. The one night, the 16th, when they had a bunch of recruits, or they have a bunch of local guys, 70, 75 local guys, come down to the south side for a prospect camp. Just local kids with a handful of out-of-state guys, but it was really focused on local kids. And Tyrese was there. And after the camp was over, it was in the evening. After the camp was over, he went back in and got to try on these brand new all-white uniforms they've got that they're going to roll out this year. The whites with a yellow helmet. And he modeled them and got to tweet out the photos of this brand new uniform they're going to be wearing. I mean, they pulled out all the stops. And I mean, that's just one example. That's not the extremes of where they went. But I mean, they developed strong relationships. They did a lot with Tyrese Fearbry to recruit him, only to have the rug pulled out with one official visit to Penn State. And so that's the second thing that stings about it. One, he was a talented prospect locally, a talented local prospect, I should say. Two, Pitt pulled out all the stops, did everything they could to recruit him. And then three, he's going to Penn State, which always kind of stings. What's funny, there's a few things. There's a few things that Kevin, you asked for my immediate reaction to Tyrese Fearbry's decision, and there are a few. I have a few reactions to it. It's funny because Fearbry committing to Penn State really kind of broke a trend. The trend that it was really in place was Pitt winning those recruiting battles for local standout, particularly defensive linemen. You go back to the 2019 class, they got Deion Hayes out of Westinghouse, 4-star defensive end. And then last year's class, they got Nakai Johnson, 4-star defensive end out of West Mifflin. They got Elliot Donald, 4-star defensive tackle out of Central Catholic. And then they got Dorian Ford, a 3-star defensive tackle out of Baldwin. All four of those guys were coveted by the Penn State staff. Penn State really wanted all of them, to varying degrees, but they wanted all of them. They made a big push for Nakai Johnson late in the process last year. Couldn't flip him. They tried to get Deion Hayes 2 years ago. Couldn't flip him. From a perception standpoint, even though Pitt fans won't think of it this way. From a perception standpoint, getting Tyrese Fearbry might have even been bigger for Penn State than it would have been for Pitt. For Pitt, it would have been a continuation of a trend. For Penn State, it was breaking a trend. And a trend that they very much wanted to break. They did not want to continue losing those Western PA kids to Pitt. No matter how much success Penn State is having on the recruiting trail, and they're having a lot right now. They're rolling. They've got like 11 four-star commitments in their class. They have a really good class. Top 5 recruiting class nationally, maybe higher. They're killing it. But even though they say they're not, they're unrivaled, even though they claim they don't care about Pitt, it was burning them up that they were losing all these guys to Pitt. I don't think there's any question about that. And that I don't mean to say that they were pushing hard for Tyrese Fearbry just because of that, just to try and get one back against Pitt. But I don't think it wasn't a motivation. Now, the other thing, too, is, kind of along those lines. Fearbry was a big one for Pitt. As a 4-star prospect, the best prospect in Western PA for the class of 2022. Those guys who are going into their senior seasons. The highest rated prospect in the class. He's a raw prospect. He's really thin defensive end, but he's rangy and athletic, and he's got, he can fill in some on his frame. I think he's got the potential to be a really good player in college. I don't think there's any question about it. I'm not going to knock Tyrese Fearbry. What's interesting is kind of what's coming up behind him. The 2023 and 2024 recruiting classes, because this isn't the last time Pitt and Penn State are going to battle for a recruit in Western PA, in the near future. As a matter, this is probably not the last time they're going to battle for Tyrese Fearbry. I don't think Pitt is going to back off of Fearbry. I wouldn't be surprised to see him at games this season, plural. Pitt games. I would not be shocked at all if that happens. I wouldn't be shocked at all if we're talking about him in the first week of December, last week of November, about the potential for a flip. Not that he's going to flip, but I don't think Pitt's going to back off. They're going to keep after him. You know what I mean? Now, but behind him, the 2023, the 2024 recruiting classes are really star-studded on the top end. I don't know how the depth is in those classes, and I'm talking about in Western Pennsylvania. I don't know how the depth is yet in those classes. I don't think it's really coming. I don't think we've got the full picture on it yet for the 23 and 24 classes. But the guys at the top, in 23, it's Tamir Robinson from Brashear, Rodney Gallagher from Laurel Highlands, both 4-star prospects, top 75 guys nationally, and probably going to go up. And then the 2024 class, you got Quentin Martin from Bell Vernon and Anthony Specca from Central Catholic. Again, national recruits. These guys are going to be top 100 recruits nationally in their class. These are the battles. These are the next battles. No matter what Pitt might be licking its wounds over losing Tyrese Fearbry. Penn State may be blowing out the candles, and celebrating on getting Tyrese Fearbry, but this is not over. There's a lot of battling to be done for this 23 and 24 classes, which have some real studs at the top. And what's funny about that is it's not just going to be Pitt versus Penn State. It's going to be Pitt versus Penn State versus Ohio State versus Notre Dame versus Alabama versus Michigan versus everybody in the country, because they're all going to want Tamir Robinson. They're going to want Rodney Gallagher, and they're going to want Quentin Martin, and they're going to want Anthony Specca. These are the big battles to fight. And the biggest bullet you can fire in this kind of fight, the biggest, tool you can bring to this kind of fight? Success. And this is a topic that we needed to get to. I don't even know why I just said it like that. It sounded like a jerk. Success. What am I, in a bad movie? This was a topic that I wanted to talk about tonight. It's something we've been talking about a lot on the message boards, and I can't stress it enough. And I've touched on it in different ways over the last 6 months. I'm going to keep touching on it in lots of different ways over the next 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, 6 months. They've got to win this year. They've got to win this year for a lot of reasons, and recruiting is not the least of those. The kind of rule of thumb in recruiting is that your current season doesn't necessarily impact the current recruiting class. It has its greatest impact on the next class. And we've seen this historically at Pitt. 13-9, December 1st, 2007. had a big impact on the 2008 recruiting class, that year's recruiting class. The class that they would sign 2 months later in February of 2008. Had a big impact because it was just that big of a game. And Dave Wanstead was able to really sell on that game and close a bunch of guys. But more often than not, what you see, you have success one year. You finish your recruiting class, that December or the following February. And then the success you had that fall really makes an impact on the next recruiting class. So you look at 2009, right? Pitt in 2009 goes 10-3. They've got themselves in the top 10, top 12 at one point. They finished with a bowl game win. Everything's riding high. And that's the 2009 season while they're recruiting the 2010 recruiting class. And they finish that up in February. And then they head into the spring and summer with the strength of that success as they attack the 2011 recruiting class. And when you look at what that staff did in 2011, in the summer of 2010, while recruiting the 2011 recruiting class, they were killing it. I mean, we talk about the recruiting class that was lost when Dave Wanstead got fired. It started falling apart when Wanstead got fired. It was truly lost when Mike Haywood got fired. But you look at that recruiting class, and it was really strong. It was shaping up to be Wanstead's best recruiting class, regardless of what those guys ended up doing in college. Guys like Bill Belton and Jameel Poteet, and Keyshawn Jarrett and Terrell Chestnut, they were loaded. They were looking like they were going to be loaded in that recruiting class. That 2011 recruiting class, which was recruited on the strength of the 2009 season. So when Pitt went out in 2018 and won the ACC Coastal Division Championship and went to the ACC Championship game, and I know it was a 7-7 season and all that, but just being able to say, you come and play here, you've got a chance to go beat the national champions before they even get to the playoffs. You got a chance to knock them out in the ACC title game. You come to Pitt, you'll have an opportunity to play in the ACC championship game, and we could prove that to you because we just did it. That impacted their 2020 recruiting class. This class, with Jordan Addison in it, and some of these freshman linebackers who look like they're going to be studs, Solomon DeShields, Bengali Kamara. It was a really good recruiting class, and it was recruited on the strength of that 2018 season. Now, so this is the rule of thumb. This is what they say in recruiting. This is how it generally works. So, coming up to this year, 2021, if you go out and have a great season, it's going to help you close some of these guys in the 2022 recruiting class, the guys who are seniors going into their senior years of high school. It's going to help you with that a little bit. But where it's going to have its greatest impact is on the 2023 recruiting class. Those guys who are going into their junior years right now. Those guys who are still a year and a half away from signing their letters of intent. If you go out and have a big season, that's going to give you a whole lot of ammo to go after Tamir Robinson and Rodney Gallagher. And then that next class after it as well. Huge opportunity here with national recruits in Western Pennsylvania. You've got a monster opportunity to put on a good show at Heinz Field, win a bunch of games, and take a legitimate step forward in terms of winning like 9-10 games. Competing for the, maybe getting the ACC championship game again, maybe not, but at least winning 9-10 games, having a season like Syracuse had. Syracuse won 10 games and finished in the top 15. Have a season like that. And I'm not saying they're going to have a season like that, but if you could, it's going to go a long way in helping you recruit some of these studs that are coming up in the next couple classes in Western Pennsylvania. This is a huge year because of that. Now, we've talked about the schedule. We broke it down endlessly. There should be 8 wins built into this thing. You should be going into the Miami, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, and Clemson games where every one of those, anytime you win one of those 4, it pushes you over 8 wins. You win 1, you get to 9. You win 2, you get to 10. You win 3, well, let's not even go down the path of where you might be if you win 3 of those 4 games. So basically what we're saying is don't it up when you play against, when you go to Tennessee, when you play Western Michigan, when you play Virginia, when you play Georgia Tech, when you play Duke. Don't blow it in those games. Because if you take care of business in those 8 games that you should win, your 4 non-conference, and then Virginia, Georgia Tech, Duke, and Syracuse, if you take care of business in those 8 games, you're going to have an opportunity to have the best season we've seen around here since 2009. Legitimate opportunity to do it. And if you can accomplish that, you're going to really position the program to move forward in the coming years. This is a huge season. I'm not going to sit down. I mean, I will at some point sit down and say, this is the biggest season for Pitt since blah, 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 blah. And I don't know what that year is. I don't know what the, season was. Probably maybe 2010. There was a lot of hype going into 2010. And Pitt kind of blew it. They went 8-5. They went 7-5 in the regular season. They beat Kentucky in the bowl game. But this is a huge season with a lot on the line. And I don't think we can say that enough. I don't think what we talk about here at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night on this live stream or on the podcast, if you listen to it through the week, I don't think it's going to change the pressure that's on Pat Narduzzi. But I do think we should make sure that we all understand what's riding on this season. I don't think he's going to. I don't really think there are too many plausible scenarios that lead to Pat Narduzzi like getting fired at the end of the year or anything like that. But the potential for a hot seat situation certainly exists if this season does not show marked improvement, I think. Just because there's so much potential there for it to happen. Whatever issues you might have with the roster, whatever issues you might have with the coaching staff, I think they should be good enough to win a bunch of games. And I think, the bar should be set fairly high for this team. All right, back to the comments. I'm guessing some people have some things to say about that. Let's scroll down here. Talking about Tyrese Fearbry, Brock McDonnock says people saying that Penn State, that Pat Narduzzi burned the bridge with Tyrese Fearbry. Any belief in that? Said Pitt isn't an option to him anymore. I mean, Pitt's going to continue. I'd be shocked if Pitt doesn't continue to recruit him. I think Pitt will continue to maintain those relationships. I mean, Pat Narduzzi, I don't know about him. I know Corey Sanders recruits the City League and a lot of the WPIAL for Pitt. I know Charlie Partridge has a relationship with Tyrese Fearbry. I know other people at Pitt have a relationship with Tyrese Fearbry. I don't think they're going to burn those. I don't think they're going to burn those relationships. You know what I mean? I think they're going to keep that going and keep trying to work on it with the thought that maybe they can still get him by December. I'd be shocked. I shouldn't say shocked. I'd be surprised if relationships were burned, or bridges were burned. That wouldn't, quite frankly, wouldn't make any sense. So I don't think that happened, but you can never rule anything out. Anthony Tennyson says, Chris, I think if Pitt football doesn't get at least 9 wins, would you consider it a failure? Because I do. I don't know if I would consider 8 wins a failure. Look, if they win the 4 non-conference games and they beat Virginia, Syracuse, Georgia Tech, and Duke to go 8-4, and they lose the other 4 games. They lose at Virginia Tech, they lose to Miami, they lose to North Carolina, and they lose to Clemson. They're 8-4. That's sort of exactly where they should be without sort of shooting above their head at all, if that makes any sense. I think that's the right way to say it. I think if you're 7 wins or under, you underachieved, and it is something of a failure. I think if you get 9 wins or more, it's a success. If you get 8 wins, it's okay. Unless, one of your wins is Virginia Tech and one of your losses is like Western Michigan or, Syracuse or something like that. Then it'll leave a bad taste in your mouth. 9 wins, I think, is a success. 8 wins is satisfactory. I think this team, I've said this before, I think the bar for this team should be 8 regular season wins every year. There are going to be years when you fall a little bit short of that, but I think, that's where you should be pretty much year in, year out, 8 regular season wins, and that's where they should be this year. Josh Newark says glass half empty, that Pitt lost a kid to Penn State, or glass half full, that we have Charlie Partridge who can find a ton of DNs. I go a little bit back and forth on this. I absolutely have a lot of faith in Charlie Partridge. You know what I mean? I think he likes Jimmy Scott, the defensive end that they did get a commitment from, the kid from Buffalo. I think he likes him a lot, and and that gives me a lot of confidence. I think Jimmy Scott, just watching his tape with my own uneducated eyes, I think he looks like he's going to be a really good player. So you do give a little bit of benefit of the doubt to Charlie Partridge, although benefit of the doubt isn't necessarily the best way to say it, because it's not like Partridge chose not to take Tyrese Fearbry. He still wanted Tyrese Fearbry. I think you assume that the defensive line is in good hands with Charlie Partridge. I think that's probably the best way I would say it. I think that's a fair assumption to make. Glass half empty, glass half full, I don't know. I would just say that I'd like to see what Charlie Partridge could do with Tyrese Fearbry. Kind of simple as that. Colin Towle says the D-line will be fine without Fearbry when they have players like Elliott Donald, Nakai Johnson, and Deion Hayes. Would have loved to have him, but it's not a total loss due to Partridge finding and developing players. Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. Look, anytime you have a 4-star talent, a guy with the potential like Tyrese Fearbry has, and he's in your backyard, you want to try and get him, even if you have a lot of talent on the defensive line. And I think they do. I think they've recruited the defensive line really well over the past few years. I think they've stocked the position really well over the past few years. I think they're going to have good depth on the D-line this year. I think they've got a lot of young talent on the defensive line coming up. They're in good shape with defensive linemen. I don't think there's any question about that. It still would be better to have a guy like that. Have a big-time guy, a local guy. It'd still be better. Royce Beacom says CBS rated the ACC coaches without head-to-head records. Pat Narduzzi was 6th behind Bronco Mendenhall, Dave Clawson, and David Cutcliffe, who he has the better record against, but ahead of Manny Diaz and Dave Doran, whom he lost to. Is it credible? I don't know. I don't know what CBS is rating him on. I don't think you can completely ignore the records they have. Pat Narduzzi's lost to Manny Diaz. You know what I mean? Pat Narduzzi has lost to Dave Doran twice. And he's never lost to David Cutcliffe. He never lost to Wake Forest, and he's only lost once to Virginia. And that was Virginia's best year when they won the Coastal Division. So I don't know. I don't know how you rate the coaches. You've got Dabo, and then what? Who do you? We're gonna go with Jeff Hafley, flavor of the month. Everybody's excited about him, and that's not to be disparaging of Jeff. I think Jeff's doing a great job at Boston College. I think he's going to continue doing a great job up there. But what do you even rank right now? Like, who do you even rate after Clemson in anything? There's Clemson and there's the rest of the conference, and that's just the state of things right now. And everything else, you're just sort of sorting out. For whatever, I don't know. I don't even know why you do it. I don't know why you bother. I don't know who you would put next. I don't know where you would put Pat Narduzzi. I don't know what you're judging it on. You judging it on recruiting. You judging it on game day coaching. You judging it on preparation. You judging it on roster management. You judging it on, player relations. What are you judging it on? There's a lot of things that go into it. Overall records, head-to-head records. There's a lot of ways you can kind of slice that and make your conclusions. And it comes down to your personal preference of how you value coaches and, what kind of priorities you put on them. Let's see here. RJC Man 38 says it is a super chatter, so we appreciate you. Says that Pat Narduzzi is ranked 44th to 46th nationally, which yeah, I guess. I don't know. I guess. When you look at success, you look at where Pitt generally has ended up. If you were to rank the teams that are in that area, you want to definitely stay in the top 50, I guess. You'd like to see them jump a little bit higher than that every now and then if possible. Kristen Wynn says, not to bring up stadiums, but thought your posts on the message board were interesting regarding a 50,000-seat stadium being the sweet spot. What's your dream scenario after Heinz Field? An off-campus stadium? So this conversation came up. Stadiums come up from time to time on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. It's one of the things we like to talk about. And we're talking about, right sizing the stadium. Do you tarp? How do you get people into the stadium? And, what do you do if there comes a time when the Steelers leave Heinz Field? What do you do if you're Pitt? Do you try and take it over and right size it? I think if that scenario comes to pass, where the Steelers are going to leave Heinz Field, move to Cranberry or someplace like that, or Moon Township or something, I think if you're Pitt, you do examine the cost of right-sizing the stadium. And I don't know what that would entail. I don't know what that would look like. I don't know how you would do it. But here's the first thing, as far as numbers go, all right, of how big a stadium Pitt should have, okay? First off, we can all agree 68,000 is too big. Pitt fan base can't support that. It's just not going to support that. Not on not even annual basis, but on a game-to-game basis, it's not going to happen. For the biggest games against the biggest opponents, yeah, you're going to get 65, 68,000. But on a week-to-week basis, you're not. All right? So that's the first thing you have to correct is the size. You need somewhere you can play that is smaller than 68,000 people. 68,000 seats. Rutgers Stadium seats 52. Pitt and Rutgers are not, I'm not equating Pitt and Rutgers. I've said before, I just have a hard time just not making fun of Rutgers, but they got that right. 52 seems to me like a really good number. Because 52, if you have a 52,000 seat stadium and you bring 45,000 for a game, which is a decent and attainable number, I think, for Pitt on most weeks. You bring 45,000 for a game. You've got 7,000 empty seats. Let me back up. You have a 52,000 seat stadium and you're playing Notre Dame or you're playing a big ACC game or you're playing West Virginia or whatever it is down the road, maybe even Wisconsin, you're going to fill 52,000 seats. You're going to, right? For the games where you don't fill it, if you get 45, which is a pretty reasonable number, I think, all right, you've got 7,000 empty seats. That sucks, but 7,000 is far better than 23,000. Right now, if Pitt draws 45,000 people to Heinz Field, there are 23,000 empty seats. For every 2 occupied seats, there's an empty. That looks bad. And especially because it's not, when you watch on TV, it's not 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. It's not like the empty seats are spread out. They're all clustered together and they look empty. There are giant sections that look empty because you have 23,000 seats without anyone in them. 23,000 seats without even tickets sold. And this is for a game where you draw 45. Shooting for somewhere around 52 seems like such a sweet spot to me. Because if you go lower than 50, if you build a stadium or you right size Heinz or whatever it is, and get it to 48 or something like that, 45 even, I understand that you'll create demand because there's fewer tickets to go around. It'll make it seem like a hot property or a hot commodity or something. Sure, but you know what? Pitt gets beat over the head with attendance in recruiting battles all the time. All right? Building a stadium or moving into a stadium that seats less than 50,000 is not going to help that. Because if your stadium seats 45, if you are Pitt, right? You, the listener or the viewer, you're Pitt, and you're, building, you're going to go into a stadium that seats 45,000, and I'm recruiting for another school where the stadium seats 100,000. I'm going to say, look at these guys. They play in like a high school stadium. This is not even 50,000 people. They can't even fit 50,000 people. There are high schools in Texas that can fit 50,000 people. I don't even know if that's true, but that's what they would say. I think at least if you keep it above 50,000, you've got a respectable number and a number that you can fill in a lot of situations, and get a lot closer to filling in other situations, get a lot closer than you would with the current 68,000 seat setup. Because look, even somebody like Wisconsin, I'm interested to see what those games draw, or Tennessee next year. I'm interested to see what that draws. I don't know if it's going to be 68,000. In the past when they played Michigan State or they played Iowa, definitely Oklahoma State in 2017, those didn't draw 68,000. But I think like Michigan State might have drawn 52. Iowa might have drawn 52. You win a little bit this year. Tennessee next year could draw 52, 55. You might have people left out. You might sell standing room only tickets if you're playing in a 52,000 seat stadium. I think that's around the right size, the right number. Where do you put it? That's $1 million question. It's probably a $350 million question. Maybe twice that or something. I've long felt it can't go in Oakland. There's nowhere to put it in Oakland. But what I've seen and what has happened in recent years is Pitt seems intent, and this is Pitt the school, not just Pitt the athletic department, on buying up every space in Oakland. And I always had this theory when we were in college in 1997, 1998, walking around the streets of walking Forbes Avenue, and the panhandlers and whatnot. And we always had this theory that all those panhandlers worked for Pitt just because they were out there just to get every possible penny out of us that they could. And then they eventually just wanted to take over all of Oakland and make Oakland not just the Pitt Oakland campus, but the entire city of Oakland, the entire neighborhood of Oakland into the Pitt campus. And so if Pitt wanted to find the real estate for a stadium, I believe they could. I don't know where. I don't know where they're going to look. I don't know what they're going to tear down. But I bet they could find it. Just got to get somebody to pay for it. But that, as far as size, that's what I would do. That's the size I would go with, like 52, 53, maybe 55 tops, but that's all. Let's see here. Scrolling down. See some of the other comments and questions, things that people are bringing up here. Josh Newark says, how much money is Panther-Lair going to set aside to get kids to go to Pitt? None. But if we can work out some sponsorship deals to get kids to announce their college commitment on Panther-Lair.com, that would be great. Coaster King says Virginia Tech is not going to be good at all, so honestly it should be at least 9 wins. Yeah, I Virginia Tech is just it feels like those Pitt and Virginia Tech have more or less held serve at home. Aside from 2015 and 2016, Pitt won down there in 15. Virginia Tech won up here in 2016, but then 17 Virginia Tech won down there. 18 Pitt won up here. 19 Virginia Tech down there. 2020 Pitt up here. 2014, where was that game played? That game was at Heinz Field and Pitt won. 2013 they went down there and Pitt lost. 2012 Pitt, game was played at Heinz Field and Pitt won. So I mean, outside of 15 and 16, since Pitt joined the ACC, and even even the last year they were in the Big East when they hosted Virginia Tech as a non-conference game, the home team has won. So I think that's a challenge down there. I think it's a challenge to go down to Virginia Tech and win, even if it's Virginia Tech's not good. I think they're going to be a challenge no matter what, just because it's on the road like that. Let's see here. Royce Beacom says, wasn't last year a must-win 9 season before the schedule changed, but 6 wins was a disappointment even with the tougher schedule. 6 wins. So Royce, I think a lot of times when we look at these records and we look at how teams perform and we look back and evaluate, was last season a success, or was it this, or was it that? And we look at last year and say it was a disappointment that they went 6-5. It wasn't a disappointment because the schedule got tougher in terms of adding Notre Dame. And Clemson. It was a disappointment because of the Boston College and NC State games. And both of those games were added to the schedule. Both of those games were add-ons. Right? I don't think Pitt was supposed to... Yeah, Pitt wasn't supposed to play NC State last year. I forget who they were supposed to play. Oh, Florida State, which they ended up playing. Boston College and NC State should not have made the schedule tougher. If they replaced Virginia and Duke, I guess. That shouldn't necessarily have made the schedule all that much tougher, but the season was a disappointment because they lost those 2 games, because they were 2 games they should have won. Just like in 2019, 8-5, good 8-win season, but you went 7-5 in the regular season because you lost to Boston College and Miami. You shouldn't have lost those games. 2018, you have North Carolina, Stanford. You shouldn't have lost those games. And I've talked about this a bunch of times, that you have this trend over the last 3 years of losses that, games you really shouldn't have lost, which wasn't necessarily the case in the first 3 years under Narduzzi. I mean, 2015, they had close losses. Iowa was certainly a close loss. That game was headed to overtime before their kicker made like a 65-yard field goal. But, I wouldn't consider that a game they should have won, like in the sense that, boy, they blew a winnable game there. And the same thing with the Navy game. Navy was a better team in 2015. They just were. 2016, you had some close ones get away. North Carolina certainly was one. Oklahoma State to some extent. The Northwestern game, you had a bunch of injuries, but I don't think you would look at any loss that season and say that was one they should have won. In the sense you would say, boy, that was really a disappointing and underachieving loss. And even 2017, I don't know if you find one in there. They just weren't very good. They obviously lose to Penn State because their offense stinks. They lose to Georgia Tech because their offense stinks. They lose to Oklahoma State because their defense stinks. They lose to NC State, they gave up like 2 plays and they couldn't score at all. They lose, North Carolina. That was a bad loss. North Carolina comes up a lot in these discussions about bad losses over the years. But overall, I forgot. Syracuse was a pretty rough loss. They had a really good chance at winning that. I think Chase Pine took a bad personal foul penalty. But otherwise, it really, there wasn't much that year. They just weren't very good. But 2018, then you get the North Carolina loss, you get the Stanford loss. I'm not going to even throw in Notre Dame. I won't even throw in Miami, even though those were both winnable games for Pitt. But the North Carolina and Stanford losses were bad losses. In 2019, Miami and Boston College were bad losses. And in 2020, Boston College and NC State were bad losses. And that's the difference between last year going 6-5 as opposed to 8-3. Or in 2019 going, 8-5 instead of 10-3. Or in 2018, going 7-7 instead of like 9-5. That's the difference. It is 6 bad losses, games that Pitt legitimately should have won. So that's where it really starts. And Colin Towle asks, if Pitt becomes a top 25 team, what's the biggest reason why? It starts with winning those 8 games that you realistically should win. And I don't want to take the game at Tennessee for granted. I don't want to say that, that's just an automatic. They should just roll right through that one. I don't want to overlook it like that. But the reality is, they should win that game. They should go down to Tennessee and they should win. Tennessee is not in a good place right now. So even though it's on the road and it's an SEC team and they've recruited good talent, they're struggling right now. It's probably going to be a struggle in the first year for Josh Hueypool. I know it's not pronounced Hueypool, but it's funny. That should be a game that they win. Just like the other 3 non-conference games and like those 4 conference games that I mentioned. And so if they become a top 25 team, the biggest reason why is that they take care of business in those games and they get one of those other 4. And they go 9-3 in the regular season. That puts them in the top 25. And they spend most of the, at least half the season in the top 25. Josh Newark says the Oregon Ducks play in a 54,000 seat stadium and people always talk about their great atmosphere. Yeah, I think it's not about the overall numbers. It's about how much you fill the stadium and how you do with it starts like creating an atmosphere. And if you have a packed stadium, you can have a great atmosphere. And I obviously Cincinnati game in 2009. Not the outcome that anyone wanted, but the atmosphere for that game was outstanding. It was as good as any game I've covered at Pitt. It was as good as 100,000 people at Penn State. It was a great atmosphere, even though it was 68,000 people. You can get a great atmosphere with 54,000 people, with 52,000 people, with 50,000 people. You're talking about 50,000 people in one place. You can get a great atmosphere. You've just got to have the right size and have the right setup. And then draw people out, get people to the games. Tim, apologize for your last name, Tim. Cyrek says, how good will the defense be? That's $1 million question. Well, it's not $1 million question. It's a good question. The $1 million question is the offense, of course. But that's a good question, Tim. And it's going to be really interesting to see what this defense does. I think if you go level to level, I think the defensive line obviously has a lot to replace with Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver, but I like the talent that they've got coming up. What I've said all along is they may not be as good as Weaver and Jones, but they could still be really good. They might not produce at the level that Weaver and Jones produce at, but they could still be really good. And that's at defensive end. And the defensive tackles have everybody coming back. They'll be who they were in 2020, and they were pretty effective, and I think they'll be even better this year. Linebackers, I think, are the strength of the defense, maybe the strength of the team. I think Wendell Davis will be really good at middle linebacker. He was the starter last season before he got hurt. You got Cam Bright and Phil Campbell on the outside. You got John Patrician coming on. Everybody seems to like him. You got Chase Pine. And then you got these young guys, and I think these young guys are going to be studs. Solomon DeShields, Bengali Kamara. I'm really high on these guys. I think they're going to get on the field. I think they're going to contribute a lot this year. And I think they're going to be big players for this team. I think they're going to be significant players. Did I forget anybody in the linebackers? I want to make sure I got everybody. Hold on. Where are they? Yeah. Oh, yeah, I did. Servassier Dennis, who could potentially be your middle linebacker. They have talent. They have depth. They got numbers. They have experience. I like this linebacker group a lot. Secondary, you're losing DeMar Hamlin. You lose Jason Pinnock. Let's start with the corners, right? So you lose Jason Pinnock. That's rough. But you're bringing back Damari Mathis. And I don't want to say that entirely balances it out, but it does a little bit. That's almost sort of a trade-off. Last year, you went into last season thinking you were going to have Mathis and Pinnock. Mathis gets hurt, misses the whole season. So you've got Pinnock and a bunch of guys that didn't have very much experience. Then you fast forward to this year, and instead of Pinnock, you've got Mathis. And instead of all those other guys who didn't have very much experience, you've now got all those same guys with more experience. And you're bringing in, Javonte Royal will be ready to play this year. And you're bringing in Khalil Anderson as a freshman. You got MJ Devonshire coming in as a transfer. He could play corner, probably going to play safety. But Rashad Battle got all that experience last year. Marquez Williams got all that experience last year. AJ Woods got all that experience last year. There's good players in this cornerback group. Safety is going to be a bit more of a question. I think Devonshire is going to be a part of the mix there, along with Brandon Hill and Eric Hallett. See what Judson Tallender can do. Buddy Mack. Some question marks there. And that group of safeties is going to have to get good in a hurry because they can't really afford to have vulnerabilities on the back end because we've seen what happens when they do. And it's not pretty. It doesn't usually go very well. So how good will the defense be? I think they'll be pretty good. I think what you would like to see from the defense, too much last year, it was like, it seemed like when quarterbacks dropped back to pass, they either had a long completion or a sack. And I found a stat where it was like, it wasn't that extreme that it was just one or the other, but it wasn't that far off. It really, it was a very bipolar defensive effort against the pass. They need to level that out a little bit more. They need to be a little more consistent in playing the pass, continue to be really stout against the run, and get after the quarterbacks. Get after the quarterbacks for sure. Let's see here. All right, last one here. Josh Newark talking about the best atmospheres at Heinz Field, the 2003 Virginia Tech game. Bart Simpson mentioned the 2003 Miami game. I think both of those were pretty outstanding. There was a Notre Dame game that year also that was pretty great in terms of atmosphere. 2009 Cincinnati game, and then the Notre Dame game at night with Jonathan Baldwin. That was also 2009, so those were two pretty good atmospheres there. And then the 2016 game against Penn State. That Penn State game might have been the best atmosphere I've seen at Heinz Field. That was pretty sensational. During the game, obviously, and then after the game, I mean, when the game ended, it was pretty outstanding. It was a special place to be that day, and it was a fun atmosphere. And I think it showed what Heinz Field can be for Pitt games. That it's not impossible to get to that level for a Pitt game. All right, I think we'll wrap it up there. I really appreciate everybody who joined us on the chat tonight on the live stream. Listen, if you are watching the live stream, or either during here on Tuesday night or after the fact during the week or something, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Subscribe to Panther-Lair.com on YouTube. The website is youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com. Subscribe to us so you know what we're doing. And I want to do more with this YouTube channel, but we need to get that subscriber base up. So if you are on if you have a YouTube account, go subscribe. And all you guys who are in the chat, you have YouTube accounts. So subscribe to us. Go to the YouTube channel and click subscribe. I see everybody liking the video, clicking like. That's awesome too. I appreciate it. But it really helps us if you subscribe to the channel. So youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Go in there and subscribe. That would be outstanding. All right. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight and joining the conversation. Thanks to you for listening to the podcast through the week or watching the live stream, whatever you choose to do. And make sure you check out Panther-Lair.com throughout the week. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting, you can find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And of course, we have the message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of your closest Pitt fan friends. Panther-Lair.com. Listen, make sure Saturday morning you check out the Panthers Insider Show on 93.7 The Fan at 8 a.m. We'll be there live talking to you about Pitt sports, probably a lot of the topics we talked about today, a bunch of other stuff I didn't even get to. Look, I had a whole notepad of things I wanted to talk about, and I can honestly tell you what's on this notepad did not get talked about at all. So we got some things for the Panthers Insider Show this week. That's 8 a.m. Saturday morning on Sports Radio 93.7 The Fan. Thanks again for tuning in. Thanks again for listening to the podcast. Have a great night. Have a great rest of the week. We'll talk to you next Tuesday night at 8:30 p.m. right here on the Panther-Lair Show, YouTube.